As we talk about chromosomal bases of inheritance, we have to also include a discussion of the sex chromosomes because they're a little bit different than your regular run-of-the-mill autosomes. So recall that in humans, gender is determined by the combination of sex chromosomes that you receive. So humans have two options for sex chromosomes. We've got the X chromosome, we have the Y chromosome. If you happen to inherit two X's, you're going to develop as a human female. If you inherit an X and a Y, you will develop as a human male. Now, when the homologous chromosomes pair up at the metaphase plate during meiosis, for the autosomes, it makes a lot of sense, right? The autosomes are homologs that are the same length, the same shape, they carry the same genes along their lengths. But what's interesting to note is that the sex chromosomes in humans also behave as a homologous pair. This makes a lot of sense when you're talking about the X chromosome, right? Because if you're a female, you inherit two X chromosomes, same length, same shape, same genes coding for the same characters all along their length. But it is also interesting that the X chromosome and the Y chromosome in males will also behave as a normal homologous pair, and yet the two chromosomes are very, very different. If you take a look at the electron micrograph on this particular slide, you'll notice that the X chromosome is much bigger, much longer than the Y chromosome, and they carry very different genes, and yet the ends of the Y chromosome still share some regions of homology or similarity to the X chromosome so that they can actually behave as a homologous pair, and they can pair up at that metaphase plate during meiosis. Now, when we look at the sex chromosomes, the X and the Y chromosome in humans, they carry very different genes. And those genes that are located on a sex chromosome are called sex-linked genes. The ones that are on the Y chromosome are called Y-linked genes, and the genes on the X chromosome are called X-linked genes. Again, makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the X-linked genes first because there's nothing really very special here about them. Because both males and females get at least one X chromosome in our species, the genes on the X chromosome code for mundane things that have really nothing to do with determination of sex or gender. The genes on the Y chromosome, though, are a little bit different. The majority of the genes on the Y chromosome have everything to do with sex determination in our species. So you probably haven't gone through a course where you've talked about the developmental process, how we go from starting out as a single fertilized cell, that zygote, and then dividing to 2 cells and 4 cells and so on and so forth, and then differentiating into the different body systems that we have. So let me give you a little bit of a preview. When you have that initial zygote, and that zygote starts to divide using mitosis, it'll create a ball of what we call undifferentiated cells, meaning all these cells are exactly the same. And then at certain points during development, some of those cells will start to branch off and go down different pathways to either create your muscular system or your skeletal system or your nervous system. And so some of those cells will go down the path of developing into your reproductive system. And during development, the male and the female reproductive systems up to a certain point look absolutely identical. So if you were to stop the development of a human embryo at that point, you would not be able to tell just by looking at it whether that embryo is going to develop into a male or a female. And it's usually at that point where certain genes will get turned on that will either lead the reproductive system down the path of becoming a male reproductive system or a female reproductive system. And so at this point where you have the branching, the reproductive system will have buds. And these two buds will eventually either become the testes in the male or become the ovaries in the female. And what determines which direction or which path that embryo is going to go down is whether or not the embryo has a Y chromosome in its cells. If the Y chromosome is present, then a specific gene called the SRY gene, or the sex determining region on the Y gene, will become turned on. And when it becomes turned on, then it leads those buds down the path of becoming testes and developing the male reproductive system. On the other hand, if the Y chromosome is not present, then you can't turn on that gene because it does not exist in these cells, and those buds will go down the path of developing into the ovaries and creating the female reproductive system instead. Now, when we talk about genes that are X-linked or Y-linked, there's a very specific inheritance pattern, right? Only males get the Y chromosome. And then for those genes that are on the X chromosome, inheritance patterns are different for males and females because males only inherit one X chromosome and females inherit two X chromosomes. And so if you have a gene that has everything to do with a disorder, and this gene is located on the X chromosome, males and females need to inherit different copy numbers or different numbers of these recessive mutations in these genes to actually show that particular disorder. So for example, in a females have two X chromosomes. In order to show the phenotypes of an X-linked recessively inherited disorder, they need to inherit two recessive copies of that particular gene, one on each chromosome. So they need to be homozygous for that recessive gene. And that makes a lot of sense. This is something that we've talked about in the previous chapter. Males, on the other hand, are a little bit different. They only get one X chromosome. The other one's a Y that has completely different genes. And for males to inherit this recessively inherited disorder, they only need to get that one copy on their one X chromosome. And so it's a lot easier for males to acquire just the one copy. They just need to get it from their mom and that's it, as opposed to females that need to inherit a recessive allele from both of their parents. And so we call males in this case that have that one recessive allele on their X chromosome, we can't call them heterozygotes, right? Because they only have one copy of the gene. They don't have two different copies, just the one. Can't call them homozygotes because, again, that would imply they have two of the same allele. And again, they only have one copy. So instead, we call them hemizygous, indicating that they only have that one copy of the gene. And so there are examples of X-linked recessive disorders that are much more common in males than in females. These are going to include muscular dystrophy, hemophilia, and color blindness, right? Color blindness is much more prevalent in males than it is in females in our population. And again, it's not that females cannot be colorblind. There are colorblind females, but it's more difficult to get that to happen because the female would have to inherit the recessive allele from both of her parents, both the mom and the dad. Okay, another important point that we need to talk about as we're talking about the sex chromosomes. So something that we haven't stressed yet in this course is that gene dosage is important. This means that the number of copies of the genes that you get needs to be normal or normalized across all of your cells. And so, for most organisms, for animals in particular, you always get two copies of every single gene. Right? You get one set of chromosomes from your mom that has a copy of every gene. You get one set of chromosomes from your dad that again has a copy of every single gene. Where we run into a little bit of trouble though is with the sex chromosomes. Males only inherit one X and females inherit two X's. So how is it that our species can survive with this difference in copy number? Females get two copies of all the X-linked genes and males only get one. And we still all somehow manage to survive perfectly fine. Well, this is because of an occurrence in females that's called X inactivation. So in mammalian females, one of the two X chromosomes in each cell is randomly inactivated during a certain point in embryonic development. And the one X chromosome that is left alone, this is the one from which genes are expressed. And then the other one kind of condenses. It doesn't disappear. It's not broken apart. It's not eliminated. It just condenses, packs really tightly together, and forms what is called a bar body. And because the DNA is so tightly packed, you can't get access to it to express any of the information that's stored in that X chromosome, and so we say that it has essentially been inactivated. And so where X inactivation shows up is actually in tortoiseshell cats. Tortoiseshell cats are all females. This is because the coloration pattern in their fur that you see is a result of X inactivation. So let's take a look at this example. So here we have a cat whose cells are heterozygotes for the fur color gene. So the fur color gene has two alleles. It's either brown fur or black fur. And this particular cat, the tortoiseshell cat, has one X chromosome from one parent where it got the orange allele, and the other X chromosome from the other parent, it got the black allele. And so when the cells of this cat go through development, at a certain point in development, every single cell decides to inactivate one of the two X chromosomes. And so in one lineage of cells, perhaps the chromosome with the orange fur allele gets inactivated, and so only genes from the black alleled chromosome are going to be expressed. And then in other cells, the opposite happens randomly, right? You might have the chromosome carrying the black fur allele inactivated, and so you're only going to be expressing, if you're this cell, the genes that are located on this X chromosome with the orange fur color allele. And then as the cells continue to divide, they'll give rise to different parts of the body of this cat. And so anywhere on the cat where you see orange fur, the cells underlying that fur have inactivated the X chromosome with the black fur allele. Any place in the cat where you have the black fur, the opposite has happened. And here, the underlying cells have come from a lineage where the original cell decided to inactivate the X chromosome with the orange fur allele, and so they're only expressing the genes from the chromosome, the X chromosome that has the black fur allele. And again, this is called X inactivation, and it's highly prevalent in mammalian females, bringing our copy number of those genes on the X chromosome to be equal with what the males have, right? We only express from one X. Males only have one X to express from.